was when I was probably around 7 years old. So talk about childhood trauma. My mom was arrested in front of me. And it was, it was a violent thing. And so 7 years old. So it was easy for me to transition unliking of people in positions of authority, especially if they have uniforms on and badges and guns. So I was arrested when I was 20 years old. I committed a crime and sentenced as a violent felon, quote unquote, to a minimum term of 8, maximum of 24 years, 8 to 24 years, of which I served 14 years in the New York State Department of Corrections. Was released in 2006, on parole for 3 years, was discharged early because, as one of my parole officers told me, dude, parole is not for you. I'm working a week after home, I'm going to school, to college full time. I met my beautiful wife several months later, got married, and he's like, why are you even here? And he pushed for me because I was considered, high risk, a violent felon, and so I have to be watched. And his immediate supervisor didn't want me to be discharged off parole, and he just went, and Albany gave it to me, so I was off parole. I've been off parole since 2009, been home over 10 and a half years now. There's nothing special about me. I was just lucky that I've met some exceptional people. One of them being one, got the head out while I was incarcerated. So what he didn't tell you was I was his incarcerated plaintiff in a famous Hayden v. Pataki felony disenfranchisement law. So I spent 14 years trying to get out of prison, and now every day of the week I'm inside the prison. 4 of which I actually spend time in. So revenge is definitely the best success.
And that's why we play.
So I'm working directly with men who are serving 75 to life. And then in the mediums, I'm serving guys who are going home in the next few months. So it's that kind of thing. So I'm approved to work. I'm actually working in the Sullivan County. So my office is in Newburgh, but I'm actually in the prison. And then, of course, doing the reentry work. So I just wanted to touch upon just a couple of issues, a couple of things regarding reentry. First of all, reintegration, the catchphrase that we've been using. It doesn't begin when someone is finally getting the news that they're going to be going home, right? So in the state of New York, we have this program that the Department of Corrections has called Transitional Services, right? And in the Transitional Services, it has three different phases. When you first come in, it's kind of like an orientation phase. You're here now, this is what you're supposed to do, this is where you access this is the programs, whatever. And then there's like a middle phase, a phase 2, where they do some kind of, other kind of educational stuff around like maybe anger replacement training, which is the program that is used in the Department of Corrections, ART. And then at the end, the third phase is about maybe around 3 months prior to releases when they sit down and now start talking about, well, you know what, do you have your Social Security? Do you have your birth certificate? Are you accessing any of the services? Are you aware of what services are available to you? 3 months prior to release. And sadly, the overwhelming majority of people, this is when they start really thinking about it. And this is sad. Now, in my experience and the way I was trained, I was already talking about reentry, reintegration, and connecting, I want to say maybe 9 years before I went home. So reentry really begins as soon as they put the handcuffs on you. That's when reentry begins, because now you're looking around and it's like, okay, I have to start planning a little bit better. Looking at it from an individual perspective, but understanding that it's not just an individual thing, because there are also, there's the individual culpability, but there's the societal accountability as well. It's that social contract that we have, that we understand in the world of HIV, because I'm in the field, that's my field, HIV. We know about social determinants of health that cause, people to wind up having poor health care, poor health access to care. But for a long time, we kind of haven't paid attention to the social determinants that play a role in someone being involved in having criminal justice experience. And in the non-traditional approach, which I'm a student of, thank you, Ayelas, we call those crime-generated factors that lead to crime-generated attitudes. And then there's all this thing that follows. So there's really a lack of transitional and supportive housing, one thing, when we're talking about reentry. So the main issue that I'm talking about 90% of the people that I work with that are coming home is the fact that there's no home to come home to. The more time you do in prison, the less likely you have to have someone that you be in contact with. And so housing is one of the biggest issues. Now, mind you, when I'm talking about reentry, I have to beg your forgiveness and let you know that I only know the male's perspective, although I'm affiliated with a lot, and I try to make sure that I be all inclusive. But reentry, there's no one size fits all. Reentry for someone who is gender non-conforming, who has been kicked, for the most part, been kicked out of their homes from when they were children, when they first started, either coming out or going against the so-called norm of gender identification. It's a lot different than for a woman who's gone through, a heterosexual woman that's going through the system as well and going through that process. And it's definitely different than from a male's perspective. It's actually a lot harder for the prior to than it is for the male, because especially when you lock up a woman. You lock up a woman, you lock up a family. The whole family is destroyed. And most of those, if they have children, which a lot of them do, the overwhelming majority of them do, those children wind up going into the system as well, going into foster care. So housing is the number one issue when it comes to this thing we call reentry. There's 60,000 people homeless any night in the city of New York, state of New York, 60,000. Taxpayers pay $2,700 a month to try to take care of those. And that, I don't even know where that funding goes because most of these people are on the street. Mm-hmm. So that's one issue. The other issue is that medical care. When we're talking about reentry and we're talking about medical care, for someone who has a chronic illness, so I work with the HIV population when I'm inside. I do HIV training. I train the men inside so they can become peer educators. I do prevention. I do HIV rapid testing. And I do connecting to care. I do discharge planning to connect those in care who are HIV positive, who are going home in their continuity of care model. And I've worked as a case manager, so I know a lot of how that works and connect them to care, especially when they go to New York City. Outside of New York City, though, almost non-existent, the services for someone who has a chronic illness and needs to continue their care. But this doesn't start upon release because the healthcare system inside drops the ball. And I've seen where people have been discharged with a chronic illness without any healthcare coverage and without any medication or without being linked to care. Now, I'm glad I'm here and I'm with someone who's working on solitary confinement. It's a whole other issue, and I don't want to take your glory, but if someone is HIV positive and they're in solitary confinement, they happen to be one of the 2,000 people that are discharged every year from solitary confinement in New York State, straight from the box to the community, right? 2,000 a year. Like, what happens to them? Let me tell you, I've been in the box. I spent 4 months in the box, and in upstate, extreme isolation. That's when a lot of times where I did most of my writing to you, probably. and then he sent me a whole lot of books, which was great. Good. So there's no programs in the box. There's no rehabilitative programs. There's no therapeutic programs. There's no vocational programs. And now you're going home if you're one of those 2,000. And if you have a chronic disease, so those are the first two things I want to talk about. Lastly, because I'm actually learning a lot about this. I mean, I've been involved. I have like a love for this. Like, I'm here today, and I'm in like heaven to see all of these beautiful, courageous, eloquent, poetic Latinos, man. I mean, I'm in heaven, man. This is like it for me, especially when for many years I was connected to you guys vicariously. I was dreaming about marching and walking and organizing, but all I could do was just read about it. So being in this room and being connected to Juan and being connected to John and the people in Latino Justice has just been great for me. There's a large portion of our people who are serving time and know that they're going to be deported. There's nothing in place for them. New York, I'm talking about New York State. There's nothing in place for them. Transitional Services doesn't even know what to do with them Because what do they know about the countries that they're going to? And like I said earlier, one size does not fit all. So if you are facing deportation from the prison system in New York State and you are going to Mexico, that's one unique thing, and it has to be client-centered. And it's not the same for someone that's going back to Honduras, somebody who's going back to El Salvador, especially El Salvador. So let me tell you about El Salvador, because one of the men that I met recently is going to be deported to El Salvador, and he said that he used to write to his consulate, write to the embassy, never got any letters. He's worried that if he doesn't have any type of services that are going to be there to embrace him when he comes in, that he could be disappeared. Especially because it's happened. Go back to El Salvador as a convicted felon from New York with tattoos and tell me where you end up when no one is there to embrace you. We need those services in place inside, and then at the same time, there has to be someone. If it's not going to be your government, it has to be some type of non-governmental organization or charitable, our churches. That community has to be there to embrace them, because then they're not alone, and then they could start connecting them to care. And this is something that has to happen from here and there, that connection. So there are some organizations that are doing a lot of good work in New York around providing services for people, especially those who are coming home homeless. So if you're homeless and you live in the Department of Corrections, you're technically, as far as the Department of Homeless Services is concerned, you're not considered homeless because you're a ward of the state. So you have an address because, you cop the plea. So you agreed to be placed at this address, right? And so when you come home that one day, you're only homeless for that one day. So you're not chronically homeless, so you don't qualify. You're at the back of the line. So we could do something about that. Why not give them that classification of chronic homelessness? It's such an easy solution. Such an easy solution. Incarcerated Nation Corps is doing a lot of great work. Now they're out in the Bronx connecting people. They're doing biopsychosocials for those that have mental illness and substance abuse that are coming home, to connect them, to try to get them qualified right away to those services. There's some great people out of releasing aging people from prison in New York as well that I'm connected to. And there's Columbia University, some wonderful sisters out of Columbia, my girl Cheryl Missy Wilkins and Kathy Boudin, wonderful people. And then of course the Fortune Society is celebrating their 50-year anniversary this year. They actually provide reentry housing, not enough reentry housing, there's not enough beds. Not enough beds. And lastly, I'm going to close with saying this, being someone, of course I'm subjective, right, because I'm formerly incarcerated, and so I'm always going to say we need more formerly incarcerated people at the table, at all tables, at leadership, at every level, right? It makes sense. It makes sense. Hashtag nothing about us without us.
Yeah,
Nothing about us without us, that's right. We're here, and I'm so grateful and thankful, and I'm hoping that, so my call and my life is that I connect with such wonderful people like you, that we can help each other move this along, because all we need is to treat someone as a human being. Show them some love and show them that there are other alternatives. Speak to the needs, speak to the substance abuse, speak to the mental illness, provide them unique, person-centered, community-specific services. And we will flourish. We are flourishing. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Steve. Let's start at the top of the order.
Let's do it.
Let's go.
So I'm Jessica Sandoval with the ACLU National Office, National Prison Project, Stop Solitary Confinement Campaign. And as I was working through developing this conversation and presentation, I had a PowerPoint, and I have decided that that's just not going to work for today. So I, as part of my presentation, want to bring into this space a family that I worked with very closely in Colorado. And so they were featured on Rock Center with Brian Williams and Ted Koppel. It's a 9-minute or so video. So it's going to eat up the majority of my time. But at the end, I would just like to make some concluding statements. But I thought it would be better to bring the voices of the most impacted into the space as well. I was basically saying the same things on my PowerPoint, and why not let them say. So I joined the ACLU about 6 weeks ago, and I have been given a platform for the next 5 years to really think and rethink what campaigns look like with people leading who've been impacted, who are solitary survivors, who are families of those who are currently incarcerated at the table and really leading these efforts. And really what I want to bring here is the plea for you all in the room to think about sending, engaging, helping to develop this idea of what this campaign looks like in a de-incarceration strategy, a way to abolish these horrible places. Because what I've learned in the last 6 weeks around solitary, having thought that I knew a decent amount about solitary, is that I thought solitary, and maybe you do too, is much of a conditions issue in prison. And it is. But what I've also realized is that it is the linchpin of prisons. And if we can get rid of solitary confinement, we have to close these prisons down, because the architectural design of these prisons in and of themselves are segregation units. And if we can depopulate, I understand that this is a long-term strategy, but I can't be in a room with you all and pretend like this is just a conditions issue. Because I'm not about making prisons better for people. I'm about getting people out.
Yes.
So I think what Nicole has to say about her brother, and hearing what the opposition also has to say, will hopefully, we don't have to have a debate about whether this is the right thing to do, but more about how we want to do it and how we see doing it moving forward. And I hope to engage with you all in a dialogue about how we do that.
We continue with our reporting about young people locked up in solitary confinement, often told it is for their own good, so they aren't attacked in adult prisons. As we've seen, round-the-clock solitary confinement can be a terrifying and soul-crushing experience, even for those who've done wrong. And we've just heard a former prison director say, there's got to be a better way. The larger question, perhaps, why does this practice persist? Jails and prisons across this country. Zach Cowell continues his report.
Many prosecutors, like Denver District Attorney Mongual, still resonate. Adult time for adult crime.
The horrendous kid that kills both his parents. They threatens to kill the other people that are involved with him, but they're going to prison. Adult prison.
Here's a flavor of the 1990s. Teenage time bombs on the cover of U.S. News and World Report. Newsweek, wild in the streets, and super predators arrive. That mood has faded, but it hasn't gone away.
These are the juveniles that kill people, that rape people, that slaughter people on our highways when they're drunk, and they're 3 years, 4 years away from even legal drinking age. Those are the kind of people that my office says, we are going to try you as an adult.
Many defense attorneys like Brian Stevenson argue that most of the juveniles in prison don't fall into that super predator category.
91% of the children who are serving time in adult jails and prisons are serving time in jails and prisons for crimes that are not murder, crimes that are not sex crimes.
It's a catch-22. Prosecuted and sentenced as adults, but segregated from the adult prison population because legally they are still children. The result? An unknown number of juvenile offenders out of sight and often going out of their minds in solitary.
He said that, they were keeping him in solitary confinement 23 hours a day, and that, he felt like he was going crazy in there.
Nicole Mira is talking about her 13-year-old brother, James Stewart, who was in jail charged as an adult and awaiting sentencing for vehicular homicide. These pictures, taken by a security camera, show his car swerving into an oncoming lane. James was drunk and under the influence of marijuana. The other driver, a 32-year-old man, was killed. James was remorseful. He knew he was going to do time. I'm sorry. There was never any question about the nature of the crime or of James Stewart's guilt. It happens, doesn't it? All the time. Martha killed someone. Certainly didn't mean to. That wasn't his intent. What do those people have a right to expect from society?
My brother having to time for what he'd done.
What James didn't know, or couldn't expect, was that he would spend weeks in solitary. Mitch Morrissey's office prosecuted James, and he was held in the Denver County Jail.
Was probably a pretty classic jail.
Well, classic is about as gentle a term as you could use for it.
It was built in the 1950s. It was a facility that was outdated. I know what you're talking about. Because, well, you know, they're sliding. They feed them through doors, and yeah, it's jail. Jail's awful.
So bad place to send a kid.
A bad place to send a kid. Kid killed somebody in our community. He widowed somebody.
The Stewart family had no money for bail, which is a common problem for Brian Stevenson's clients also. He represents a great many minority children charged as adults.
The rate of sexual violence for children in adult prisons is 10 higher than other adults. Suicide rate much higher, and solitary confinement is pretty horrible for anybody, but it's especially horrible for a child. It is psychological torture.
That's more than just one defense lawyer's opinion. It's an established medical conclusion.
So many people become psychotic. So many suicides.
Psychiatrist Stuart Gracia cites research done for the CIA on the impact of solitary confinement on American POWs in North Korea.
What was produced by that was a person who was so unhinged he was disoriented, disheveled. They wouldn't sometimes know who they were. They couldn't think.
It terrified James Stewart. For a while, he'd been in a cell with another juvenile. They got into a squabble. The corrections officers came to move him, this time as punishment, back to solitary.
You know, my brother begged, please, crying, the other boys crying, please don't split us up, we're fine, nothing's wrong.
And because of that, James was thrown in what they call the hole.
That's correct.
How long was James there?
6 minutes or so.
6 minutes?
6 to 8 minutes or so. Just a very, very small amount of time.
And in that time, look, I mean, this is the essence of what we're talking about, so I realize
Yes, no, please.
it's difficult for you, but what happened?
It was stated that James, that when he got in there, he was pretty upset. He had taken a sheet and he had wrapped it around his neck and just twisted until he couldn't twist anymore.
James Stewart was 17, part of a rising tide of juveniles who commit suicide in solitary. Though he feels James Stewart was properly prosecuted, Mitch Morrissey is the first to say that the system is broken.
Incarceration is not the answer. But when there's nothing left, because you stripped all these other parts of our society out because you can't afford them, because you don't want to do them, then we're the last ones standing. And if we're going to be the punching bag of the media, well, you don't have the institutions you're talking about. Is that the criminal justice system's fault? I don't think so.
But the harshest indictment of all, Michigan's former director of prisons, Pat Caruso.
The economy that we have built, which depends on people being incarcerated for long periods of time.
Tell me what that means. The economy that we have built that depends upon incarcerating people.
There's fairly common theory in corrections that over a period of decades, our country converted from a military-industrial-based economy to a prison-industrial-based economy. We went into communities who either wanted the prisons because of the good jobs they provided and the boost to the local economy, or perhaps we went into a community who didn't have the political ability to stop it. But most communities love their prisons. You know, the people who work at those prisons, it's not their fault. They're just doing their job. They're hired to do a job, and they do their jobs.
Do you realize how disgusting that is?
I mean, people in my business talk about it all the time.
But at the end of it all, says Dr. Grassi, we're shooting themselves in the foot.
You have these kids getting more and more out of control, more and more impulsive, more and more emotionally out of control because they're in solitary. It's very likely that's going to be a permanent impairment in their lives.
And those in society who say, too bad they shouldn't have committed the crime in the first place.
Well, guess what? 95% of them are going to get out back into your community. So what do you want them to be like when they get out?
Well, it's a chilling note to end on. And Ted, if you look at it as a subject matter, think about how solitary has been used as a weapon against us, the United States, to break our guys.
It was used by the North Koreans in the Korean War against U.S. POWs. It was used by the KGB. Dr. Grassi, who saw there at the end, said the KGB did not use physical torture. They simply used isolation as a way of breaking people down. We're talking about political dissidents. We're talking about soldiers. Here, I'm talking about kids. It is just a national disgrace.
Well, as we said, it's a story not in people's ken. They don't walk around thinking about it every day, and now, perhaps, they will. Thank you. Always a pleasure. Our next report has to do with those who have raised their hands to volunteer.
Somebody hit the lights, please.
So I don't really have to say much more, and I don't think I have to convince anybody in this room that this practice, both for children and adults, is unacceptable. And I think, I'm here to ask you all to see these intersections in the work that you do, and let's think about ways that we can more effectively bring folks to the table, build campaigns. Like I said, I have 5 years to do it, so I'm happy to do it right from the beginning, and looking forward to engaging with any and all of you who might be interested in talking at least about what's capable or of interest to you in your states.
Go first. What do you want to take us?
This is Juan. This is Jessica. I think I want to take a moment first just to acknowledge this power of the space. I've been looking at this Corazon over the past 2 days, just to acknowledge where we are and to acknowledge Pulse and the power of this community. So, and gracias for opening up this space to these folks. I think it's incredibly powerful. With that, it's so powerful just to be in this room and to think of these folks and everything we've been through. It's even more powerful to think of so much that's already happening against us. The person in the film said the criminal justice system is broken, and it's not broken whatsoever. It's working exactly as it's meant to be doing. And my job, as somebody who works with the Drug Policy Alliance, is to end the war on drugs. So what does that mean, right? Yeah. So, well, maybe clap. Let's see how that goes out. When I first got this job, I come out of organizing and the labor movement. So my parents are two awesome, humble Mexicanos from Luis Potosí. They love Jesus. They totally understand it. Very Catholic. So this is all feeling like I'm at home. It's really weird. So when I came home and told them my job was to end the war on drugs, they had no idea what I meant. So I said, legalize marijuana. And my mom started crying because she thought I said I was going to sell marijuana. Which is like just a huge disconnect immediately. But that was my job. It's one, if I could convince my parents it was my job, then I could convince other folks. So I was really trying to break it down to them. The first thing I started off with my parents was racism, which I totally understood as immigrants, and explaining that the war on drugs is, in fact, a war on people of color and a war on immigrants just like them, regardless of whether or not they ever use marijuana, which I'm sure they do. And if you look back at the origins of marijuana prohibition in the early 1800s, late 1800s, it was literally to attack Mexicans. Mexicans were taking the white jobs. You know, the Chinese were taking jobs in San Francisco, so they criminalized opium. And then there was a craze of blackness. They criminalized crack cocaine. So the origins of the drug war have been and always, you know, will be, regardless of who will say, in effect, the perpetuation of racism, the perpetuation of the fear of the other. My parents got that. Which is interesting because a lot of Latinos around the country don't get that. You know, and if my 70-year-old conservative Catholic Christian parents can get it, but other folks don't, there's a disconnect there. And as I've traveled around the country talking to Latinos, Latinxes, and realizing we're not a monolith, we're completely different folks, different parts of the country, and trying to explain that, I've come to see the stigma of drug use, the stigma of our communities, you know, that self-shame of being not the respectable immigrant, of trying to assimilate. And I believe we saw a little bit of that in California with the marijuana initiative, where a lot of Latinos didn't come out and vote in favor of it. They were very apprehensive. So our job has been trying to break down this idea of the drug war and really convince and show folks that it's a war on our own people, it's a war on our own headband. One good example of that now, even though California has legalized marijuana, if you're undocumented, you can still get deported for using it. Which goes to show that it's specifically a war on people of color and a war on immigrants. I think another really important example for me has been with the overdose epidemic, right? So I joined DPA about 3 years ago, and I've seen this overdose epidemic go from being something that was criminalized to now being a public health issue. So you see these white suburban kids using heroin, and it's no longer seen as a criminal justice issue, it's seen as our kids need help. You know, these are good kids, these are good people in the respectability politics, but when it's people of color, then it's criminalized. I think I even saw a Super Bowl ad about a white cheerleader girl who's using heroin, and folks are saying, oh, you know, she needs some help, she needs to get that. So it's framing that in that perspective. One person really helped me understand this, how other folks see it. I think Maritza talked about this, is this guy named Jason Hernandez. You know, we're the same age, and we grew up at the same time, and our lives were just very different. He grew up in Texas. He grew up in this small town, McAllen, I believe. There weren't a lot of opportunities. A lot of those folks were criminalized just for being a person of color. So, you know, he didn't have any opportunities, and the system did was exactly what it was supposed to do, and Jason got caught up in the criminal justice system. He ended up serving 18 years out of a 300-year-plus life sentence. Yeah. For engaging in the same thing that white kids have done all over this country. He was the first Latino to get clemency under President Obama, and now he's out. And he's really trying to explain to Latinos that we need to be there for each other. The story that really moves me, when I first met him, the story that moved me the most was, he said no Latinos were there for him. He was in jail writing to everybody. He wrote to MALDEC, he wrote to NCLR, he wrote to every single person. Nobody got back to him. He said, you know, it's completely insane that my people were not there for me. You know, without Michelle or Xander, who's a black woman, I never would have gotten out. I never would have been there. So to hear Jason say that, you know, it makes me want to work that much harder, but understand the importance of ensuring that Jason is at the forefront of these movements. That you know, it was great that Stephen was here, but we also need to ensure that everybody on this table is somebody who's directly impacted, so they're leading their own movements. Jason's voice is so incredibly pertinent. Focus a little bit more on stigma, because I think that has been something that's really been damaging our communities when it comes to the drug war, when it comes to criminal justice reform. You know, Jason asked me, why haven't the groups like NCLR and all the other groups taken on criminal justice before? And I think that's a fantastic, amazing question. I think without Maritza, without Juan Cartagena, I don't know if we'd be having this conversation in this room. And it really takes folks like Juan and Maritza to make the space for us to say, you know, this is a Latinx issue. You know, we need to be there for black folk, we need to be there for other folks, because this is criminalizing our own communities and tearing our own communities apart. So I think it's incredibly powerful that you're all here in this room, that we're talking about this, that we're talking about the drug war, that we're talking about the ways that folks are criminalized and put into jail. So, yeah, I don't want to keep up too much time, but just saying that, at the end of the day, the drug war isn't necessarily about drugs whatsoever. It's about the criminalization of our communities, the criminalization of being an immigrant and a person of color. Something else I need to read this. So one example, this is amazing. So we're live streaming, and as I was saying that, somebody from my DC office emailed me and asked me to read a paragraph. Right. So this is one example of how the drug war impacts Florida, and there's one campaign we're working on here in Florida that we would love your help on. So this is what I'm going to read. I'm going to read you the whole email because it's kind of funny. It says, awesome. If you want to mention that Florida is one of only a handful of states that automatically suspends driver's license for a drug offense, following a federal law mandating states to do so, even though there was a process built into this federal mandate for opting out of the automatic suspension requirement. In Florida, thousands of people living in places with no good public transit have their driver's licenses taken away, regardless of the severity of the drug offense or whether driving was involved. People who rely on a car to get to work, get their kids to school, get healthcare can't legally drive. Low-income people and also communities of color are disproportionately impacted and harmed by this law. Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke has introduced a bill to repeal this federal mandate on states to do this. The bill has bipartisan support, but needs more support from Florida Republicans, including your amazing Senator Rubio, David and Jess. So that is something happening here, and if that is something that you would be able to help us on, that you would be willing to reach out to Rubio's office on, that you would be able to collaborate with us on, that would be great.
Thank you, and thank you for that.
Hey everybody.
Leyla.
So you're gonna have to excuse me a little bit because I am usually really emotional anyway. But that video touched me for a lot of reasons. I have an 18-year-old son. Yeah. Those are our babies. I'm sorry. So I have an 18-year-old baby that I have to cry. I'm terrified. I live in the Bronx, born and raised in the Bronx, so is my son. I grew up with drug dealers all in my building. My friends, they would walk me up the building when I got home late at night. I'm not worried about the drug dealers in the corner for my baby. I'm worried for the police. That they're either going to hurt him or they're going to put him in prison or something like that's going to happen to him. That's not what I was going to talk about today. But, yeah. Aaron Hernandez also killed himself today in prison. He hung himself. And a lot of people are celebrating that. I'm not. He suffered a lot of trauma, like a lot of us have so much trauma. We're not dealing with that. We're not dealing with people that are hurt, right? Hurt people, heal people, heal people. We're not trying to heal people. This is not what I'm going to talk about. I don't know. I'm so recently, so this is why this hurts so much. I'm formerly incarcerated. I'm the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. And I've been doing this work for a few years now, not as soon as I came home, because as we all know and discuss, the stigma in our community about being incarcerated are really strong. So it's hard for us to talk about it. I have family members that didn't know that I was incarcerated. My mom just kept it to herself. Oh, how's Leyla? She's fine. And not mention, oh, Leyla happens to be incarcerated, right? So although I was doing all this work and I'm dealing with it, like so many of my friends are to solitary confinement and all of that, I never somehow, somewhere, don't ask me how, I blocked. I never realized that I was in solitary confinement. When they're putting people with mental illness when they first get to the prison in solitary confinement. That's what they did to me because I had a history of suicide, right? So then when you first walk in, they ask you, have you ever, so yeah, why am I gonna lie, right? When I was a teenager, I was going through some stuff and I attempted suicide. Are you suicidal now? No. Yes, they put me in a room by myself, butt ass naked, no sheets, nothing. And the person in the door watching me 24/7 with 3 things. because I had mental illness. So they're putting people with mental illness in those rooms. How is that right? I didn't even realize that until about a month ago, and then it knocked me out. It's like, how the hell do you block that? How do you block that experience? I have been witnessing people talk about it, discussing it, and it took me reading something for school, and they were talking about the different ways that there are solitary confinement. I was like, holy wait. But I just wanted to let you know why it's so emotional to me that. But I'm gonna go into what I was really gonna talk about today. Let me start. Maybe I'll stop crying. But so I'm gonna read you a poem that I wrote, and I'm not a poet, but experiences in my life from time to time make me write. And this, so I'm not you. My story does not end here. My story does not end because of you. Who are you? What are you? You are just a word. You don't identify me. I'm not you. You do not define who I am. I'm so much more than just you. You are but a fragment of the complex human being that I am. Why do people only see you and not all of me? I'm so much more than just you. I am made of flesh and bone. And like everyone else, I have made more mistakes than I can remember. And I have more flaws than I would rather admit. I'm not just you. I'm resilient. I'm a mother. I'm a scholar. I'm Dominican. I'm Latina. I am a woman. I am a million other things. Yet I'm only judged by you. Why? I am just you. They see you, but they don't see the story behind you. They rather turn a blind eye to my reality in order to continue believing that I'm you. They prefer to ignore the truth, that I'm just a victim of my circumstances. I'm not you. You are only but a fraction of the story. You are not the complete picture. You demonstrate that I took the wrong path, but you neglect to express how difficult the road was. You do not illustrate how extraordinary I have made the journey since then. I am so much more. I am not just you. I have so much more to say, but I'm so sorry. I don't think I can.
Yeah, I want to say something. I want to thank everyone for encouraging your words. We had some good conversation yesterday. And I want to say something. The way that we sometimes, I used to have a policy, but I had to leave that. The way that people judge recidivism, the way they judge efficacy of programs, is better than recidivism rates. Those are rates that look at failures. Not of individuals, but of policies and approaches and programs and history. Those of you who have money, who have access to money, who have access to whatever, individuals who work in policy, who work for national organizations, people like Leyla and myself and other people who've been incarcerated, in many ways, it's not until we find others like us, who've been through those systems, who've been in solitary, who had to come out, who had to shed, had that shame, who had to have that stigma. I went to prison 3 times, and each time I got out, I had a place to stay, I had a job, I had a profession, I had everything I was doing. It was only until I associated with others like me and said, you know what? You and I here, and all these others, they don't know, and it's the peer approach that has been adopted and used now. A lot of other approaches has been discarded when it comes to reentry and reintegration. We are discouraged from hanging out with each other. I introduced a bill this session and I was laughed out of there because I said, hey, Why don't you have people encourage them to join groups like Texas Advocate for Justice? You know, what you call pro-social approaches, right, to community. They said, you can't do that. Because then they quoted risk factors and criminal justice, all this bullshit that I can talk about and that I just reject now. I encourage individuals to look at groups like that, to look at individuals who have gotten out and who have whatever term you want to use, made it, and look at the commonalities that they have. Maybe there's some of the failed approaches that we keep using, and we keep putting back into place, and we keep saying, thank you.
I feel like oftentimes when we have conversations with folks who step into these large policy umbrellas to do work around issues like this one or these one, and then and I see it show up so strongly on the panel of the experience of the families. To be a family member of somebody who gets incarcerated for whatever, it is then also receive them should they get out. The trauma they're carrying from having gone through that experience, the stigmas, the only very recently named trauma of something like solitary, what that's like when it comes back into a home, especially if it's a parental figure. The responsibility of the children of incarcerated parents and what they all of a sudden have to do and how they so quickly lose their childhood because the parent is gone and they have to raise their siblings or they have to try to do everything at once or deal with money, etc., etc. The burden on whomever's left, and all of that is so often either not represented or very underrepresented in these spaces because that's not usually who's working in these spaces. And ACLU does a poor job of this because they don't hire enough effective people. There's so much they do well. It's not a call out. This is just an honest observation. DPA is another. We know that's missing. I'm wondering what it can look like, how we can support, how we can just build in that direction of saying that this is an inside and outside problem. And there's a lot of people on the outside, and that scripture was mentioned earlier about speak for those who can't speak. Well, there's people who can do a really good job of that because that's who they love and that's who they're related to, aren't being welcomed into the professionalized or decision-making parts of these spaces. How can we, and I'm not, when I name these orgs, though, this is all of us, how can we, it's a genuine question, how can we do that a little bit better or a lot better?
I mean, I think we have to give up our seat, right? And I think that can be uncomfortable. And we have to make the space, I certainly would never go somewhere to represent an issue without somebody who's been affected by it sitting next to me. And I think that is an uncomfortable approach for a lot of advocates, particularly in the legal sphere. I think that, we see the transformational power of it, right? You can't do this work without it. And so I think it's about how learning from each other, about how people are showing up in that work, learning to care for each other who are traumatized by it, and also not making the assumption that because I show up in this way that I am not personally affected. And I think a lot of people make those assumptions. In fact, at my previous organization, before I left, I had a funder come talk to us and say, so when are you making plans to put people who are affected on your board? And I was like, whoa, why are you assuming that all of us in the room are not affected? Like, I don't want to have to show up every day with my trauma because you think that I'm not affected, or that I have to justify why I'm at this table because I'm affected. And so I think there's a lot of assumptions about what affect looks like. And so I think we have to do a better job at knowing who's at the table and who's coming to the table as well. I probably didn't answer your question, but that's where I went with that.
Two, and then I think, wow, hold on. That's three.
I personally want to respond to Lex's question because I think it's one that I struggle with for a long time. I identify as a re-entered citizen, which Leyla has helped me talk about recently. But I spent 4 years trying to get a freaking job, and I am a law school graduate. Okay, I owe more in student loans than I do on my house. And I have the degrees, I have the resume, but that fucking road, right? That fucking road, I went the wrong way, but that road was a messed up road, right? And so I had to work at the most random places that would let me work just to feed myself. But I wanted to do this work. I wanted to give some of my experience to someone that would listen. And honestly, to credit my former supervisor, I don't know if it's a SPLC thing, because I'm not going to credit the organization. I'll credit the person who interviewed me. She saw that I checked that box, but she also saw my resume. And she said, after my interview, she said, come into my office. I want you to tell me what happened, because I'm going to have to justify this to someone, and I want to have your reasons. Not my reasons, not what I want to have I want you to tell me your story. And I told her everything, because I was like, what the hell do I have to lose? And she took a chance on me, and the organization did, because she took a chance on me. I've been there for 4 years, and I'm still struggling with it, because I enter circles where I'm not trusted, where I'm looked at questionably because of a lot of reasons, but that's a big one. And I'm constantly having to justify, like, no, I'm affected, I'm at this table, and it's hard and it's stressful, but I think that those of us in positions where we can hire people, where we know people who can hire people, have to say, hey, there are quality people out there, and you can't just be looking the other way just because they check the fucking box. Why is that box even there in the first place? And I think that really makes a difference. So
I want to talk a little bit. I was originally supposed to talk about, which is weird. The 13th, yesterday. Today wasn't mentioned, but yesterday was mentioned a lot, right? The 13th is amazing. If anyone has not watched it, please watch it. It should be required, like Michelle Alexander's book, required reading, and this should be required seeing in every school. However, I do have one complaint. It does not, I think in every conversation, it should be mentioned the fact that while women are only, 7% of the prison population, because men are 93% of the prison population, right? However, the rate of women has grown over 700%. We are the fastest growing population in 7 prisons. This should be discussed in every damn conversation. Women should, and what Stephen said, nothing about us. So I'm part of the National Council for Incarcerated Reform and Incarcerated Women and Girls, and that is our motto. Nothing about us without us, because we were not at the table. Women were not being brought at the table, and women's issues are not the same as men. We have different issues, and our kids. If a man goes to prison, kids usually stay with their mom. So what happens when the mom goes? Right? And over 80% of the women who are incarcerated are women. Our mothers. I'm sorry. Over 80% of the women who are incarcerated are mothers. 84% of them have been victims of rape. 84% of the women. 77% of them have had partner violence. So that we're victims also. We're people who've been traumatized, who have issues of our own, who have not been, that hasn't been dealt with, and this is how, I guess, it pays out, or I'm not sure what it is, but why are we not discussing this? Why are we not dealing with this? It's a really big number, 700, not 70, 700% in only 40 minutes. 64% are women of color, and that's because they have 36% that are white. And I was thinking when everyone was like, okay, we need to reevaluate that whole.
Look at those numbers.
Yeah. So yeah, we need to start talking about the women. We need to start bringing them to the table. We need to start looking at the issues that we're dealing with.
Thank you. Let me take a chance now to just thank this panel. I'm sorry to cut off some questions.